So far in the course, we learned a number of methods to gain access to computers. We learned how to do that using server-side attacks, client-side attacks, and using social engineering. We tested everything though within our own network, just to simplify things. That does not mean that these attacks only work inside the network. In fact, all of them work outside of the network, on the internet, even if the target computer is connected to different networks or even if it is in a completely different country. The only thing is, you need to configure port forwarding properly. You can do that using the router's settings page, and that's what we're going to focus on in this course. But you can also achieve the same results by installing Kali or your tools on the cloud, or using a cloud SSH server, or using a tunneling service that is designed to solve this very problem. Obviously, each one of these methods come with its advantages and disadvantages, but we're focusing on the first one because, in my opinion, you have to understand how this method works before being able to use all of the other methods. So we're spending 4 lectures explaining this method in detail so you can use it with whatever service you want, whether you want to use it with Beef, with backdoors, with your own web server, or with any other service that you want to expose to the internet. And then if you face any limitations or if you want to learn other methods, then you can check out the other methods that I actually covered in various places that, as you can see in here. I didn't want to cover them all in here, obviously, because this is not a social engineering course. This is an introductory course that is designed to introduce you to most hacking fields. And then if you want to learn more, you could actually check out the other methods, with the main next method being the one in number 4 in here, using tunneling services, which I covered in my social engineering course. So check out the bonus lecture for more information. So first of all, let's have a look on a default network setup. So we've seen this before, we've seen a similar diagram. And right here you can see that we have the router, we have the clients that's connected to the router, and then we have the router that is connected to the internet. And we mentioned before that all the clients, all devices inside the network, they actually don't have internet connection. They can only access the internet through the router. So whenever they want to request something, whenever they want to go to a website, for example, if they wanted to go to Google, this device will actually send a request to the router. The router is going to go to the internet, it's going to get google.com, and the response is going to be sent to the router. Then the router will forward that response to the device that requested it. So inside the network, each device has its own private IP. So we can see these IPs are written in red, and these only exist within the network. That's why we call them private IPs, because outside the network, these IPs are not visible. And we can see that the router here has 2 IPs. So it has a private IP in red, which is accessible by all the devices in the network, and it's only used inside the network. It also has a public IP, which I have here in green. And this is the IP that's accessible through the internet. So this is the IP that Google sees. So whenever you actually go to Google or to any other website, they see an IP address, but they won't see your private IP address. They'll actually see the IP address of the router, because the router is the device that's actually making the requests. It's not you. So all the requests made by all of these devices on the same network, they'll all appear as if they're coming from the same machine or from the same IP. This is again because the only device that has access to the internet is the router, and it's none of these devices. Now, let's go back to our scenario. So we usually, in most cases, or if you think about it, in all of the attacks that we do, the main thing is we want to get a reverse connection. Even when we're using Beef, we actually get a connection on port 3000, which is the port that Beef is working on. And when we're using our backdoors, we actually receive a connection on the port that we specify when we make the backdoor. So the thing that to keep in mind when you want to send that backdoor to somewhere outside your network, the first thing you want to keep in mind is that your local IP is not going to be visible. So what you want to do is you want to use the public IP, the IP of the router. And to get that, all you have to do is just go on Google and then type in "what's my IP?" And as you can see, Google is telling me that my IP address is this. And this IP will actually be the same from all the machines in the same network. Now I should note here, if I run ifconfig, I'm actually connected through a wireless card, so I'm not using a NAT connection. I'm using an external wireless card that's connected to my home network right here. So all the devices in my wireless network at home will have this IP. Again, that's because they all use the same router. They're all connected to the same network. So we're going to use this IP in our backdoor. We're going to send the backdoor to a person that exists on the internet, so exists in here. That person is going to run that backdoor, and that backdoor is going to use a reverse connection. So it's going to try to connect back to the router on port 8080, for example, if we chose that port in the backdoor. Once the router gets a request for port 8080, it won't know what to do with it, because the router is not actually listening to port 8080, and this request will not tell the router where it wants to go. So what we need to do is we need to configure the router to tell it, whenever you get a request on port 8080, then I want you to forward that port to the Kali machine. And you can do that for any port you want. So I'm just using 8080 as an example, but you can do it for any port that you're listening on, whether it's 8080, 444, or 3000 for beef. The main idea is you want to use your real IP outside the network. So whenever we run any attack in previous lectures and even in future lectures, if you want to run that attack on the internet on someone that doesn't exist on your home network, then first of all, make sure you use your public IP, and make sure you configure your router to forward requests on the port that you're listening on to the Kali machine. And I'm going to show you how to do that in the next lecture. Right now, I just want you to get the idea of what we need to do and how is that going to work. So we're going to have examples in the next lectures, and it's going to become much more clear. Okay, so now let's go ahead. Let's create a backdoor. And the only difference is we're going to set the IP to the public IP instead of the local IP. So we're going to create a backdoor exactly the same way that we used to create it when we're hacking devices in the same network. So I'm going to use will evasion. And I'm going to do this a bit quickly because we've done it and there's nothing new with this. So we can list to see what we have. I'm going to use number 9. So it's the exact same payload that we used in our previous video. It's the reverse HTTP payload. So we're going to use 9. And we can see the options here. We can see that the L port is set to 8080 by default, and I'm going to keep that the same. The only thing that I'm going to change is the L host. And in the previous videos, when we were receiving connections on our own computer, we used to set it to the local IP. So if I do ifconfig LAN 0, we used to set it to 192.168.0.1 because that's the IP that the devices use inside the network. But whenever we want to do things on the outside, we want to use the real IP because these internal IPs are not visible to computers outside the network. So I'm going to use the IP that I see on Google. So when I type in what's my IP, I get this IP, and I'm going to use that as the L host in my backdoor. So I'm just going to copy this, and I'm going to set it here. And sorry, I didn't paste it properly. So hit info to make sure everything is set up properly. So port 8080, we're using the public IP. So this is the most important step in this. And then we're going to do generate. And we're just going to call this backdoor.exe. I'm going to hit enter. And that has generated my payload for me. So it's stored in here. So again, as usual, I'm actually going to copy this and paste it in my var www.html. And I'll show you how to actually even download this from the internet from outside the network. So I'm just going to copy this to my web server directory. Okay, so that's all done. Now all we have to do is just listen for incoming connections. We're going to do that using the multi-handler. So we've done that before again. I'm just going to do it real quick. And when I'm going to listen to the multi-handler, I'm actually going to listen on my local IP. So I'm not going to listen on the external. I'm going to listen on the local because I can't listen on the external. I'm actually in the network and I only have control over my current computer. So what I'm going to do now is in here in the Kali machine, I'm going to listen on port 8080. And in the external device, the backdoor will try to connect to the backdoor. So the step after that will set up IP forwarding to tell the router to forward ports 8080 to the Kali machine. But first we need to listen on port 8080 in the Kali machine, and we're going to do that using the multi-handler. So I'm just going to do MSF console. Again, we did this before, so I'm going to do it a little bit quickly. So I'm going to use exploit multi-handler. I'm going to set the payload to Windows Meterpreter reverse HTTP. Then we're going to set the L port to 8080. So that's the port that we're going to get connections on. And then I'm going to set the L host, the listening host, to my private IP, as I said before. So I'm going to do set L host to 192.168.0.11. Now I'm going to do show options to make sure everything is done properly. And we can see that we have the L port is set to 8080 and the local host is set to 192.168.0.11, and we're using a payload of Windows Meterpreter reverse HTTP. So it's all good. I'm going to do exploit. As you can see here, it's listening on my private IP and it's listening on port 8080. So now we did the two main steps. We created a backdoor, and the backdoor will give us connections back based on the real IP address. And we're listening on our local machine. We're listening on port 8080 in the Kali machine. So when the target person runs the backdoor on the internet, they're gonna get the backdoor will try to connect to this IP on port 8080. The only problem now is the gateway, which is the router right here. It doesn't have port 8080 open. So it's going to receive the connection. It's not going to know what to do with it. So we actually need to configure the router to tell it whenever you get something, whenever you get a connection on port 8080, I want you to redirect it to my Kali machine. And we can do that in two ways, and we're going to talk about them in the next lecture. Now in this lecture, we'll learn how to configure the router so that it forwards incoming connections to the Kali machine. So we can receive reverse connections, we can hook people to beef, and launch attacks outside the network the same way that we used to launch them inside the network. So to get to the router settings, usually the router is the first IP in the subnet. So you can see that my IP was 192.168.0.11. Usually the router is the first one, so it'll be 192.168.0.1. Also, another way to get it, you can type in route n, and that'll show you where the gateway is. And as you can see, it's at 192.168.0.1. So this is the local IP address of the router. We're gonna browse that in our browser. So I'm just gonna type it in here. 192.168.0.1. Hit enter. And as you can see, I have my router settings and I have to log in with the username and password. Now, the router settings might look different from router to router, but the names are usually the same. Usually, first of all, you'll have to log in, as you can see here for me, and you either have a default username and password, or you'll see them on a sticker behind or underneath the router itself. So for me, I've actually changed the password, so I'm just gonna log in. So I'm logged in here to my control panel, and again, it might look different for you, but you want to look for something called IP forwarding. For me, it's under advanced. So I'm going to go to advanced, and then I'm going to go on forwarding. And this is where I can set up my IP forwarding. So look for something called IP forwarding, or I've actually seen them on some routers called virtual network. I don't know why, but you want to look for something that allows you to set up rules to redirect ports inside the network. So the port that we're listening on at the moment is port 8080. So that's the port that we picked in the handler, that's the port that we picked in the backdoor, and that's the port that we want to get the connection on. So the public port is going to be 8080. And again, the target port is going to be 8080. And the target IP address is the IP address that's listening on the port. So this is the IP address of the Kali machine where you have your handlers running. So the IP address of my Kali machine right here is 192.168.0.11, and we can see that also right here from the result of ifconfig. So it's 192.168.0.11. I'm gonna type that in here. And that's it. That's the rule that we want to add. I'm gonna click on save. And that rule is saved. So now whenever the router gets a request for port 8080, it'll know that it's gonna forward that request to the Kali machine, and the router will not cut that connection. So we've actually set up a proper route right now. So the first thing we did is we created a backdoor. We used the real IP in the backdoor. We didn't use the private IP. So we didn't use the 192.168.0.11. We used the real IP. We're gonna send that backdoor to a device in a different network. That device is gonna run the backdoor. The backdoor will try to connect back on the real IP to the router, but the router will know exactly what to do with this because we just set up a rule telling the router to forward any request that it gets on port 8080 to the Kali machine. What I also want to do is I actually want to set up a rule for port 80. This is the port that Apache, that my web server runs on, and I want to enable that so that I can download the backdoor from the target computer. So I'm going to add a rule for port 80. And again, this is going to be the same machine, the Kali machine. And we're going to put port 80 here. We're going to save this rule. And this will allow me to download the backdoor because I placed the backdoor in var www right here. So I'll actually be able to access my web server in Kali and download the backdoor from outside the internet. So I'm going to start my Apache web server. So this is actually just another example. You don't really need to do this. You can just transfer the backdoor using USB or any other method or send it by email. I'm just showing you another example of how port forwarding is used. Now I'm going to go to a Windows machine, and that Windows machine is going to be connected to a completely different network, and we're going to download the file from there. So here's my Windows machine. And if I go and check my IP, you'll see it has a different external public IP. So I'm just going to look for what's my IP. You'll see that the IP here is completely different than the IP of this machine that we used. So these are two completely separate devices connected to different networks. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to access my Apache web server and download the backdoor. And normally without IP forwarding, you won't be able to do that. And to access that, first I'm going to get the IP of this machine again because I forgot it. And it's 89.100.145.189. And we called our backdoor, so I'm just going to type in backdoor.exe. And I'm going to hit enter. It's actually 189 here, not 89. And as you can see, I was able to download the backdoor. And this should actually tell you that IP forwarding has been set up correctly, because without IP forwarding, I wouldn't be able to access my web server and download the backdoor. So I'm actually accessing the web server in Kali as if it's a normal website. Like you can actually host fake web pages, you can host websites, anything you want right now on your Apache. So I'm going to come in, I'm going to run the backdoor. And we'll see if that'll give me a reverse connection on my Kali machine, which is on a completely different network. And as you can see, I got a reverse interpreter shell, and you can see that the shell is coming from an external IP address into my internal IP address to the Kali machine. And right now I can control the target computer and do all the things that we do in the post-connection attacks. Okay, now let's have another example on hooking people to beef when they exist outside our network. So again, we're going to have the example against the same Windows machine that's in a completely different network, and we'll see how we can hook that machine to Beef. So first of all, I'm going to start Beef. Just one click right here, and that will start Beef for me. And I'm going to log in. Username is Beef and password is Beef as well. And we're logged in. Now, we're going to use the same basic hook method that we did before. So in that method, we need to get the script code right here, which is this. I'm going to copy that. And we did this before. So again, I'm going to do it a little bit quickly. And we placed that in our Apache web server. So placed it in an HTML page. And that was in always our Apache web home directory is var www.html. And I'm going to open my index file. I'm going to open it with the text editor. And I'm going to paste this code right here that I got from Beef. And the only thing that you want to change, all of this is okay. The only thing that you want to change, as I said before, anywhere that we used to use our normal IP, we're going to use our external IP so that people, when they try to connect, they'll actually be able to find our computer, because if we use the internal IP, they won't be able to see it. So again, I'm going to use the IP that we see on Google when we type in what's my IP. And that's it. I'm good to go. So I'm going to save this, quit it. And now I need to enable port 3000, which is the port that Beef works on. As you can see, we can see that it uses port 3000 here. So I need to tell the router again in the IP forwarding settings, I need to tell it to forward any request that you get on port 3000 to my Kali machine, which is at 192.168.0.11. I'm going to save that. And that's it. That's saved. Now we're going to go to the Windows machine. We're going to go to our website, which is basically my IP, my external IP. And we're going to go, it's going to run index.html automatically because the file is called index. So all we have to do is just put the IP of the network that Kali is connected to. So what we need to use is this IP address right here, which is 89.100.145.189. And we should be hooked to Beef as soon as we browse to that IP. So let's see what happens. Okay, now let's go to Beef. And as you can see, we got a Windows machine hooked, and it's using Firefox 50. And now we can run all the commands that Beef allows us to run. So let's just throw an alert and see if it works. And it just says Beef alert dialog. I'm just going to execute it just to make sure that everything is working properly. And as you can see, we managed to hook a machine that exists in a completely different network. And again, to confirm that, I'm going to go on Google and I'm going to look for what's my IP. And as you can see, the IP is completely different to the IP that's in this machine. So again, all we have to do is use the external IP address whenever you're sending it outside the network. Use the IP that you see when you type in what's my IP address. When you're listening on your own machine, use the local IP, and make sure you configure the router to redirect the port that you're listening on to the Kali machine, to the IP address, to the private IP address of the Kali machine. An alternative to using IP forwarding, you can set the Kali machine as a DMZ host. Now, not all routers support DMZ, that's why I didn't show it from the start. But if it supports it, you can use it. And what DMZ does is, it's basically IP forwarding, but it forwards all ports. So, if you put the IP address here of the Kali machine in here, what the router is going to do, anytime it gets a request for any port at all, it'll forward that request to the Kali machine, regardless of what port it is. So with port forwarding, you actually select which ports you want to forward to Kali. With DMZ, it'll forward all the ports to the IP that you put in here. Now again, both of these methods can be used to allow devices on different networks to access your computer. So you can receive connections, you can allow them to access a website. If you're hosting a website on your web server, you can allow them to access fake websites, you can allow them to access Beef, The Hook, anything where you're listening on a port, you can use this method to allow people to access it if the people exist on a completely different network than your own network.